Okay, so a new documentary that came out a couple weeks ago on Hulu, directed by Ron Howard, called 8 Days a Week.
I did not
The
know it was
touring
directed by
years-
Ron Howard.
Yes, it was directed by Ron Howard. It was a Beatles documentary.
Mm-hmm.
I've watched a few Beatles documentary. I've never really considered myself the biggest Beatles fan.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and for a while, I think a lot of, especially young people and people maybe my age, kind of go through this phase where they're kind of sick about hearing how great the Beatles are. But I mean, they really were.
Yeah.
They really revolutionized music. And if you pay attention to the music that was coming out before the Beatles hit versus the music that came out after, they changed everything.
Mm-hmm.
They really changed everything. And here's something I picked up in the documentary that I didn't really notice, because I think the last time I watched any kind of Beatles documentary was whenever the anthology came out. Remember the big box set, and came out with an 8-part television documentary. And I remember watching it with my dad. They played all 8 parts, and we watched the whole thing.
Was that like a Ken
This
Burns
was
documentary or something?
Pretty much, but it was 8 episodes, 8 like hour-long episodes about the history of the Beatles.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I watched that at home. I was still living at home with my parents, so this was before I even graduated high school when this came out. And that's when they released like Free as a Bird and Real Love, like the lost Beatles songs. But one thing that I didn't pick up on, and I didn't really realize until I watched the 8 Days a Week documentary, is the Beatles only lasted from 1962 to 1969.
Mm-hmm.
And just the incredible amount of albums. They put out 13 albums in that time. And if you listen to Please Please Me or Love Me Do or I Want to Hold Your Hand versus like
The
Let
Long
It
and
Be.
Winding Road,
these
While
songs
My
on there-
Guitar Gently
Right.
Weeps.
Could you imagine a band today in that short of amount of time having that much of an impact and that much of an evolution? That's really whenever somebody says, "Oh, the Beatles are overrated," you've really got to put that into context. It's like imagine NSYNC turning into Radiohead
in the 7-year period.
in 7 years, and having every album they put out is at number 1 for weeks and weeks and weeks. And that was just those things.
And they
that
put
I
out
didn't
2
realize.
albums a year.
Yeah, especially and once they stopped touring, and that was the thing was about how the touring and the grind really got to them, and it was pretty much the show at Shea Stadium that kind of was like, all right, we gotta slow this down. Because bands didn't play stadiums back then until the Beatles became so huge.
Right.
And really the cops wouldn't let them. They're like, you can't play a 5,000 seat venue and have 50,000 upset teenage girls outside. And really cops and law enforcement didn't really know how to handle these crowds.
Right.
They may have thought that they were prepared when the Beatles first came over, but there was like 10,000 people waiting for them to get off their plane. And everyone says that, well, it was the Ed Sullivan show that broke them. They were already number 1 before they landed.
Yeah.
Before they even played Ed Sullivan. Otherwise, they wouldn't have had thousands of people waiting for them to get off their plane. And it just kind of goes, it's just kind of crazy to think of how different music would be now if we didn't have that band. And yeah, they came along at the right place in the right time, but also had 3 of the best songwriters that ever lived.
Yeah.
And I went through their discography. I've put it all on my phone and been listening to it a lot over the past couple of weeks, and just really just like, man, I can't believe how many of their songs, there's songs of theirs that I didn't even realize were theirs. Until I was like, oh my God, that is the Beatles. And I love that song. So if you have Hulu, highly recommend you watch this documentary. There's a lot of great things, a lot of great interview clips, a lot of live performance on there because it focuses on their live shows, but also it's kind of ends really sad because the last scene on there is them singing Don't Bring Me Down or Don't Let Me Down on the rooftop. That was their last live performance ever.
Yeah.
Okay, that was in 1969. John Lennon didn't even die till what, 1980? 81, yeah. So they had that whole like 10, 11-year period where they all did their own thing. And, they could have had that hope that maybe there'll be a Beatles reunion someday. And then John Lennon got murdered. And now George Harrison is dead. And so, Ringo and Paul, they're going to be next.
Yeah.
And then for, in our lifetimes, there's going to be a time where there's going to be no surviving members of the Beatles.
Yeah.
And that sucks.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the Monty Python thing.
Yeah, the thing from last week. Yeah.
Right. Where it's like, pretty soon, Terry Jones has got dementia. Pretty soon, John Cleese, Eric Idle, Michael Palin, Terry Gilliam.
In all likelihood, it'll
they're
be
gonna die
before you're 50.
Yeah. And it's sad. But like I said, I wasn't like the biggest Beatles fan. I think I'm more of a fan now since I watched the documentary than I was even then. But I've always liked them.
Yeah.
But it's just, you kind of have to watch a documentary like that, or you kind of have to dig into it just to see how much of an impact they had on the cult, just everything. I just don't even know what the world would be like. How different would the world be if we never had them? You know what I'm saying? Would we?
Yeah. I can't even fathom. I literally can't fathom what the world would be like without the Beatles.
They were so culturally significant.
I mean, okay,
on a global scale.
So the classic rock station that we have here in town, like just trying to think about, because how much music from the Beatles actually plays on that station. I mean, it's at least one an hour.
Yeah.
In most of the day, and just how different all of those bands, how different that station would sound if the Beatles hadn't been there to influence Led Zeppelin and The Who and the Rolling Stones, especially. All like, man.
And would bands like that even have a platform? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I watched this YouTube video where it was someone playing an acoustic cover of While My Guitar Gently Weeps while it was a slideshow of famous people talking about the Beatles. And like some of the things, like you would have people like Tom Petty and dudes from Kiss and Alice Cooper and Ozzy Osbourne, and they're all saying the Beatles are the reason I became a musician.
Yep.
The Beatles are the reason I pursued a career in this. And it's not like some band wouldn't have come along, but it would just be so different. And that's the thing. It's hard to fathom.
And would they have had the message, the resonating message that Lennon and McCartney had as songwriters?
Right. You never know. What would it have been like if John Lennon had never died? If he was still alive and making music today? Would he have put out an album kind of like I Got My Mind Set on You by George Harrison? I mean, what would John Lennon's music in the 80s sound like? Because we know what George Harrison and Paul McCartney's music. Now I'll tell you, I absolutely love a lot of Paul McCartney's solo stuff.
Yeah.
The song "Baby I'm Amazed." You know that song? Baby, I'm amazed at the way you love me all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I've probably heard it.
It's one of my favorite songs ever.
Nice.
And it's not even a Beatles song. It's a Paul McCartney song. But who knows? Who knows? We'll never know.
Yeah.
Because he was taken away from us by some asshole.
Yeah. Until we learn how to travel the multiverse.
Yeah, we would have to go back in time and stop it, because if we cloned him, it just wouldn't. You have to have that right set of circumstances,
right?
Those influences and that environment.
He's got to be growing up in the 50s in Liverpool.
Fucking Liverpool, man. Who would have thought? But yeah, so I'm glad we got a chance to reminisce about that. What are some of your favorite Beatles songs? Before we move on?
Mostly just the ones that, like I mentioned earlier. Most of my favorite Beatles songs did come from the latter half of their career. Because, the stuff that they did at the start was very poppy and, bubblegum shit.
They were good.
They were still good, yes. Yeah. No, they were still good. Don't get me wrong. I mean, we sang Twist and Shout at karaoke last week.
Yeah, dude,
so.
that song's awesome.
But, like Hey Jude, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, like all the ones that everyone knows are legitimately some of my favorite songs.
Right, and they're hits for a reason.
Yeah. While My Guitar Gently Weeps touches me in a place that I might need to talk to a priest about.
Oh, wow. Speaking of While My Guitar Gently Weeps, did you see the performance that it was like a VH1 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame performance where George Harrison's son, along with like Tom Petty and some other performers and Prince, all played on, and Prince plays this blazing guitar solo. And if you ever meet anybody who doesn't understand that Prince is such an amazing musician, show them that video.
Exactly.
Where he plays that solo on While My Guitar Gently Weeps. It's fucking mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Mind-blowingly awesome.
Blackbird. I just thought of another one. Blackbird.
Yeah. One of my favorite songs and one of my favorite albums of theirs is Magical Mystery Tour.
Mhm.
And it's funny because I love the song I Am the Walrus because it is so nonsensical
I Am the Eggman.
and weird. And I remember asking for that album for Christmas one year, and my aunt got it for me. And
Nice.
I wore that album out. That was the only Beatles album, like actual physical CD, that I ever owned.
Nice.
Yeah, was Magical Mystery Tour. So that one was mine.
I had a
It had like Penny Lane and Fool on the Hill,
Right.
and all that. Yeah.
I had the Beatles 1 collection when I was
Yeah.
in high school. Like, my grandma got that for me, and I was like, oh, it's the Beatles. That's cool. And then I listened to it. And then I listened to it again over and
And
over
you're like, "This is
and
the best
over
shit
and
ever made."
over. Yeah.
But that's, I mean, they dabbled in a lot of different genres,
Mm-hmm.
from, you know, doo-wop and rock and hard rock. I mean, and then just kind of weird progressive psychedelic
Mm-hmm.
kind of stuff. And then they put out some silly songs,
Yeah.
and great love songs and revolutionary songs. And
Mm-hmm.
would there even be a band that you could even compare them to?
No.
No.
I'm
And
just
that's the
yeah,
thing.
I'm gonna-
Like, there's a lot of bands you could compare to them,
Yeah.
but there's nobody that you could compare them to
Yeah.
in terms of popularity, amount of singles, amount of hit records, cultural significance. It's just, you know, they're bigger than Jesus, dude.
Mm-hmm.
And they actually talk about that in that documentary,
Nice.
8 Days a Week, and it actually shows John Lennon where he's like, "Look, I wasn't talking bad about Jesus or Christianity in general. I was talking about the youth of England
Mm-hmm.
and what do they have to look up to, and what are they into, and what is on the pulse of the youth of England, and we are more important to them than Christianity. We are more important to them than Jesus." And that's the thing. People in England didn't care that
Yeah.
he said that. They're like, "Oh, he says we're bigger than Jesus. All right, well, that's
Yeah.
nice of him."
I mean, it's
Uh,
accurate.
But Americans, and it showed clips of the burning Beatles albums.
Yeah.
And like this guy on the radio is like, "You can drop your Beatles records off at this drop off point and we'll go burn them for you," and all this stuff. It's like, wow. I'm so glad that is not a mainstream thing. Is like burning books and records. I mean, people still do it,
Yeah.
and I'm a victim of it. Did I tell you?
Somebody burn.
I
Like
thought I'd told you. My parents owned a bookstore in Harrison, Arkansas, and they sold Dungeons and Dragons stuff. And and this was in the 80s,
Yeah.
when my parents filed for bankruptcy. And when they went out of business, the Eagle Heights First Baptist Church in Harrison, Arkansas, bought all the Dungeons and Dragons stuff and had a public burning
Wow.
of it. Yeah, because it was satanic. Apparently.
Yeah.
Which is weird because my parents are super religious.
Yeah.
But they just happen to like science fiction and fantasy and role playing games and stuff.
And
like
they
that.
owned
They're-
a fucking bookstore.
yeah, they're
People want to
super-
buy stuff.
Right. They're super religious, but they're also like really like nerdy too.
Yeah.
You know, and they can separate fantasy from reality,
Of
which
course.
apparently some people can't.
Yeah,
Because they're
well,
like, we gotta burn this stuff.
Religion
Keep it away from our.
so.
Maybe my dad used to paint miniatures.
Yes. Did he have a Demogorgon?
I don't know if that was a thing.
Sorry, Stranger Things reference though.
All right.